Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. This is Our Whole Childhood. I am your host, Patrick Tian, and this is the podcast where we discuss everything childhood trauma, from the issues that we experience to the stuff that comes up in our families and to the healing work that we're all trying to get done. If that's interesting to you, let's check out this episode. So I think our biggest fear as parents is that we're failing our children somehow. And if you're worried about that, I think most parents are, this will help you approach that fear with some compassion. Here are some examples of stressful parenting situations that no one really prepares you for in life. Let's say you have an infant or a toddler that bites you when they're frustrated because they can't quite talk yet, and you have to watch your reaction to all that, which is super hard. In other words, you have a child that is really the opposite of your personality, and you struggle to really get them and you don't really know what to do about that. Another is you're struggling with postpartum depression and your older child is needing you more and you don't really know how to talk about it with them, or you don't have the energy to. Another is you have an in-law that is really overstepping in your life and is intrusive, and you have to watch your reaction to them in front of your kids. Another is your 12-year-old is extremely upset about their friendships and not being included in things, and you really don't know how to help them with it or how to respond. Another is your child might make fun of you sometimes, and that pushes really like a huge button, like a core wound in you, and you really have to watch your reaction. Another is, let's say you have the flu and you're in bed and your 4-year-old keeps coming in to see if you're better now so you can take them out for ice cream, and you're like so close to rage about it. Your child has been getting school lunch for a month, even though you pack them with a lunch daily from home, and they've been lying to you and getting lunch somehow, and you're having really big feelings of betrayal and disrespect. And such a waste of time and money and energy. So another is your child is, say, bullied at school by a kid or a teacher, and you don't really know how to approach that or what to do about it. You don't really know what the best course of action, instead of like going guns blazing. Another is your teen spent $600 on games and apps because your debit card or your PayPal thing was attached to their phone or their gaming account, and you didn't set up some kind of verification because that's like a mess and all that kind of stuff, and you feel really violated and enraged that they racked up such a bill, and you have to go seek out refunds and stuff. Another is, like, even if you have a co-parent that is extremely limited or manipulative, or they're like weaponizing incompetence, and you struggle with not talking bad about them in front of your kid, or even grilling your kid about the time they spend with that parent. Another is your teen has shifted into being close and affectionate with you to being distant and kind of private, and you worry if they now hate you or they're withdrawing somehow. And lastly, you're on a flight and you're in a fight with your partner, and your infant has like an up the back poop explosion, and you really like no longer want to be a parent. Some questions I have for you now that I've probably either completely maybe validated your experience as parents, or really bummed you out or turned you off from ever having kids. I have some questions for you. Think about this. In any of those situations that I just named, how would your parents have responded to any of that? How might you be afraid of how you respond to any of those situations, or how did you respond to some of those situations? How would you actually like to respond if you could deal with the triggering and all that and kind of know what a better approach or how to address things would be? You know, how do you want to respond? And those are all very triggering and actually kind of common situations for parents. And our culture and our society kind of expects us to know what to do and be flawless about it, or be super understanding with our kids and all of those. So that's actually not really possible, because there's a lot of human emotions that go on with all those examples that I just gave. If you're new to me and wondering who I am, I'm Patrick. My channel is focused on childhood. I'm a parent myself, and at one point in my life, I worked as a nanny for about 4 years before I got my master's in clinical social work, and I worked as a clinical therapist for about 17 years. So that's a little bit about me if you're wondering what I'm talking about. I'd like to discuss our parenting triggers and how we can rethink them. And I'd also like to discuss healthy parenting concepts that is going to help you reset when you are triggered. So like with our other relationships in life, our triggers with our children can really tell us about our childhood story. Our reactions and our parenting are kind of clues to that childhood story. That's why I asked you earlier about how might your parents have responded as like a thought exercise. The following list is going to be helpful to you in really being able to nail your triggers as a parent. Those triggers are kind of the things you might be confused by, like might be confused by your reactions or your emotions. So here are 5 categories of how we tend to get triggered by our children or about our children that's related to our childhood story. Try to have these be validating for you instead of feeling like they're shaming you, because that's not my intentions. It's almost like in society where we're not supposed to struggle with any of these things, which again is impossible. After we discuss these 5 categories, try to create a list of your specific triggers and maybe go back to the video later and plug them into these categories for some like further insight. There's always going to be a present piece to parenting and our triggers, which is stressful, but most likely there's a bigger childhood piece from your past that is complicating your reactions and your emotions. The first category is my children are not safe or they're in pain, or AKA it's happening again. This looks like overly protecting them from harm or discomfort. It looks like projecting your experiences onto their experience. And it also looks like problems that your child is having feel so big and kind of too familiar to you. And coming back to the list at the beginning, what happened to you if your child is bullied or you worry that they're being bullied? That's one of the most common ones where our body goes back to a certain place in time with those experiences and we're triggered by it. Ideally, any parent would be, of course, be triggered by it, but there can be an additional it's happening again feeling in our body. A huge issue in parenting is if you grew up with a raging or punitive parent and you trigger yourself if you have to set reasonable limits with your child. Again, like setting the limits feels like it's happening again, and now that looks like I'm the perpetrator when you're just a parent trying to set limits. It's happening again in your body is confusing your child being abused by you setting normal limits and having reasonable frustration from you. That's a big one. The next of the 5 category is something called my children are too privileged and they don't get it. And this is an unfair experience. This looks like having resentment about what you provide to your kids, resentment about what they don't know about your own struggles or your emotions or even your past, resentment about your child's self-focus. Children can be kind of narcissistic because that's developmentally where they're at, like that 4-year-old, you've got the flu and they want ice cream. The resentment about your child's self-focus is like you aren't considered. Like with their example of the child unknowingly spending $600 on video game stuff with your card, this category is really centered on being triggered by our own kids when they're like oblivious to what you have going on or what you provide or what you struggle to provide. So this category is often a really baffling and triggering one because maybe like me, you grew up with super reactive parents and they were punitive and maybe even vindictive, and you spent a lot of time as a child not making any mistakes, like the $600 credit card thing, out of terror and of retribution. We want our own children to have a sense of self, but not just be compliant and afraid of us. Like they can't learn effectively if they're afraid of us or have to take care of us. So we do have to even watch our reactions to that ridiculous experience of the $600 things. I just want to take a brief pause here and talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. On this podcast, I don't have outside sponsorships because I feel like those sponsorships kind of muck up the message of the kind of work that we're doing. The thing that is near and dear to my heart is my monthly healing community. This is a program that I started about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, when I really noticed that my audience did not have access to kind of a community of like-minded people or resources or just specific guidelines and tools about how do you start working on childhood trauma. The membership is really comprised of 3 things. The first thing is weekly journal prompts that I send out every week. They are really focused on specific issues that childhood trauma survivors struggle with and how to reparent the inner child. They're really journaling, dialoguing inner child prompts. The other component is a whole bunch of coursework that people get, things like the Children's Bill of Rights, The Family Rules. My favorite on there is Reparenting the Inner Child, which teaches you how to dialogue with your inner child and do some self-led work. And lastly, the third part is every 2 weeks I do a live Q&A to give specific attention to members' questions, and we talk about it. Those are all recorded as a resource in the membership as well. There's a platform that's very, very easy to navigate. And I really love it. It's essentially a program I created for people who wanted to start doing some childhood trauma work and maybe they didn't have direct access to a therapist. The community component is really just one part of it. Many people kind of enjoy that. Many people just want to do self-led work, which is all okay to do that there as well. You just go to the podcast description, click on my website, and look around for membership, and all the information is right there, and you can sign up today. And I hope it's helpful to you. Moving on to the third category is, I don't know how to do something or provide certain things. I'm blocked. I don't know how to guide them through their emotions. I don't know how to guide them through certain tricky situations. I don't know what the correct responses are between consequences and learning moments that I'm going to be teaching him. This one can feel really shaming, but given that healthy and super effective parenting in our own childhood is actually super rare, the trigger here with this one is usually not having been modeled healthy parenting, paired with the fear of not wanting to do to our kids what was done to us. So it's like we're a little bit caught. So we can feel blocked and we can feel shut down and on the spot, like we're caught between not knowing what to do, but also not wanting to do damage. The fourth category is, I don't know how to connect with my children. I'm blocked. I don't feel confident in affirming them. I don't know what to talk about with my kids. I can feel uncomfortable and actually bored and ashamed of that around my kids. This one is also super tricky, especially if you grew up in emotional neglect or didn't feel connected to one or both of your parents in a strong way. So like with number 3, this comes down to having a lack of modeling. Any one of us who didn't grow up in a child-centric, many of us didn't grow up in this, a child-centric home where things like play and connection that were developmentally focused were the focus, we will most likely struggle with knowing how to connect with our kids in deep ways. Not all of us, but some of us. The last one here, the fifth category, is pretty tricky. I'm triggered by the responsibility of the parenting work and my children's needs. I feel guilty about not enjoying parenting like maybe other people do. I feel exhausted and invisible by being a parent. And I'm constantly trying to not show how I really feel. I'm stuck. So that's some really hard stuff, but this is real stuff that happens in parenting. I think unless a parent-to-be has been working in a daycare or was a nanny at some point or a maternity nurse or grew up as like the oldest with many siblings, hopefully they weren't parentified, they most likely were, no one really knows what to expect when they're having children unless you kind of have that background. And there's a really harsh reality, or actually a freeing truth, depending on how we want to frame it, is that people might have wanted kids. Many people do want that experience in their life, but they realize they don't like being a parent when that time comes. We can't help those parents if we just shame them about that very real human experience. It's something that culture and society just doesn't really want to like address that much, but let's be real. It's a demanding, extremely triggering and stressful job. Also really rewarding and all that kind of stuff. But when you don't know, you don't know. It's really a messy, draining, and unrelenting job, especially if the children are very young. But we can rally and actually learn to love and accept the job more if we know what the triggers are and check our inner expectations. The second thing I want to really talk about are these are going to help you reset those triggers as principles of healthy parenting. Related to our triggers, here are some general guidelines that are helpful for us to refocus on in our parenting when we're triggered. And as I read each one, reflect on how the principle was missing in your own childhood and plugging that concept into how you might be triggered. These all have situational nuance to them, so just be aware of that. Try to take them in as guidelines instead of judgment. The ones that will have a big sting to them as I read them will be the ones that are most important to you and that you might need to work upon. Try to not go to a shame place about these. Try to go to a place of goals and thinking about how to shift. The first one on these principles is protecting our children from shame. We want to protect children from too much shame so it doesn't stay with them like shame stayed with us. We don't want basic learning mistakes to become a negative sense of self, because that also happened to us too. And like us, they can't really learn when they're ashamed. The next concept is protecting them from our emotions that they can't handle. Adult emotions are really big, especially to small children. And they're super loud, especially when we're dysregulated or we're overwhelming them. And a parent needs emotional support through this kind of stuff. They're safe when we are in charge and when we're in control of our own upset, and when they know that love still exists during upset. This is a really hard call here, is that we have to watch our reactions, be in control of our emotions, and be helpful to them at the same time. That's a lot. That's really a lot. And especially if you struggle with mental health or you struggle with your childhood, it's a lot, to be honest. But it is the goal. The next is the assumption of development needs to be primary kind of at all times. When stress and difficulty pops up, do we see them for their developmental age? I mean, our children. Or do we see them as like inconsiderate adults? When we're really triggered, we usually see them as the latter. We need to always be reframing our parenting frustration along with their developmental needs into teaching moments. They are learning how to be human, and we're their teachers, whether we like it or not. The next is, and this is a big one for me, is the intimacy needs to be clean with good boundaries. We don't make fun of others around them or maybe in general. We don't character assassinate others, especially our partners in their life. We don't want them to become our support system because we're supposed to be here for them. We want them to trust us because we actually act trustworthy. Like, a side note is children are extremely smart and they see how we behave. And what's harder about it is they will absorb a lot of our behaviors. And lastly on this one is we are here for them, not vice versa. We're the ones providing unconditional love on their behalf. And we can experience love with our children, and that's great, but we're not getting unconditional love from them. That's like a big red flag in some parenting. The next is being the resource for them, and they actually come to you because you're safe. We don't have to have all the answers, but we have created a space where they can come to us. And what is that space that we're creating like for them? We can seek out answers if we don't know them, but if they come to us, that really tells us that we are safe to them, which is probably very different than your childhood. The next principle is letting them learn, letting them fail, letting them grow, letting them feel. We need to allow our children to have a process and not overly police, not overly take care of, not overly hover over their experiences. We might be doing that from our own childhood of protecting them because we weren't so unsafe, but it's the opposite and becomes equally as dysfunctional. We encourage them to become capable by going through something with our help. And we help them handle things, not take difficulty away all the time within reason. And we need to allow them to have some bad choices with older kids within reason, as a teaching moment. Not like we're setting them up for failure, but sometimes we can't just always police every decision that they make. Most of my learning in life has been about sort of failing, unfortunately. So hopefully don't take that literally with your kids. The next one is hierarchy versus popularity. Healthy parents maintain authority, but do not become authoritarian. There's a big difference there. Healthy parents do not enable their children in an effort to be liked. That's what I mean about like popularity. There's this parental type called the popular parent. It's a lot of enabling to be liked. Children feel safe when there is a consistent person in their life watching out for them and making good decisions and good choices. That does fall under the umbrella of being an authority in their life. But that word has so much contextual ickiness to it. For anyone out there who is super neglected, super scapegoated, super marginalized in a way, think of the times that you actually longed for a parent who would tell you to go to bed at the right time, who would provide things, who would know what was going on in your school. That's what I mean by this one, like an authority. The next is accepting frustration and some disconnection. It can be really messy and our children can be mad at us, which is really hard. Healthy parents can allow for that and allow space. It's just like in any other relationship in our life, that kind of waxing and waning of intimacy. The next is, and my favorite is, not taking it personal. They're struggling with ego, like everybody else, I guess, and developing a sense of self. They're experimenting with power and some moodiness, especially if you have a teenager, and we kind of need to let them and not take it personally. They might dismiss you by experimenting with having some power. They might lie. They might be disrespectful, or they might defy you. It's all teaching moments. If you have that going on constantly, that might be an issue where you might need to get a resource for your child and probably for you. And a part of development is the teaching. The teaching includes reflecting on how you feel and how they impact you within reason. That's different than raging and unloading on them if they're disrespectful, which is probably what happened maybe in your own childhood. The next principle is children who are safe, they get to be jerks. Safe children are going to seem entitled to adults who grew up like me, terrified and ashamed. Try not to take that literally, but what I mean by that is that if I didn't look the waiter in the eye and directly and, loudly give them my order in a polite way, I would get raged at, where kids need to be reminded that they're kids and they can kind of be oblivious and a little bit thoughtless to other people in their life, not to an extreme extent, but they're just kids. Hopefully you know what I mean by that. Teaching moments are different from being triggered by a child's thoughtlessness or their seemingly entitlement, which is kind of part of their development. The next principle is shared power. Healthy parenting includes children in decisions within the family about themselves, within reason. Sharing power, such as allowing them to speak in conflict, is not only helping them develop a sense of self, but also instilling a value of equality versus dominance. How many of you out there in your childhood is like you were dominated? Look at me when I'm talking to you kind of stuff. We want them to be able to take that equality during conflict into their own relationships and maybe into their own parenting if they become adults and choose to do that. Lastly is one of my favorite ones. This was so helpful to me, is they are just feeling their feelings. Healthy parents lean into their child's feelings as the priority, within reason. Unhealthy parents are often threatened by emotions and actively try to either avoid them, minimize them, be abusive around them, or try to shame their children for their emotions. An infant crying to a teenager being moody are simply our children. They're just feeling their feelings. So those were the principles, and here's my final thoughts. I would love to know what struck out the most from you. If you want to write it down in a comment or something like that for the healthy principles or the triggers, the ones that really sting are going to be super important to you, because those are telling you about where to kind of go into, what the ones to lean into to do some work around. So I highly recommend writing them down, or best put it in a comment. Those will be your places to kind of do some work. And I'm also going to be offering an in-depth webinar on healthy parenting that consists of an hour-long lecture, a worksheet on these issues, and you'll also get the recording of that lecture that you can reference at any time. In the webinar, I'm going to go into more detail about all of these issues that complicate our parenting, and other issues like having a difficult co-parent or having difficult in-laws, or more specific childhood situations that you went through that complicate your feelings and complicate your triggers and complicate your parenting. I'm also going to go into more specific types of triggers, more explicit examples on how to work with those triggers through this worksheet with guidance on how to work with the triggers when they actually come up in real time instead of afterward. So the webinar is going to be a live event. There's going to be a Q&A at the end of that event. But if you see this video after that event, it's also going to be available as a course, so you won't really miss anything. So it's super important to not shame ourselves about our parenting. That shame, like I mentioned, that if our kids feel shame, they can't learn. We're the same way. That shame will play into our biggest fear, again, which is that we're failing our children somehow. Shaming ourselves actually sabotages the shifting and the learning and the growth, because we can't take in new information from kind of a shame hole. Also, don't expect yourself to cover all of those healthy parenting principles immediately and flawlessly. It's going to be really a process for things that we need to work on and kind of get on down the road with those. And as always, if it's available to you, a therapist who gets the triggers, ideally a parent themselves, who gets family system stuff, is going to be a good resource for you, again, if that's available. There are also really good and helpful parenting coaches out there too, who really are experts around these issues, such as having a very difficult co-parent or a child who acts out a lot. Just making it through this with me and seeking out resources says a lot about you already in your parenting. You want your child to have a safer experience than you did. Celebrate that. Really take that in. Please leave a comment if this was helpful to you. There are many nuanced situations, and I know that this was kind of general and overarching. I don't mean to dismiss any of your situations or information. And I know that each one of these might not be specific to what you're struggling with. I want to acknowledge that. I've added some additional thoughts in the video description that might help you if you have questions. Check out the video description. Check out the webinar course if you follow a bubble up here. That'll take you to that information. And as always, may you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. And may you be joyous. And I will see you next time.